Hey everyone, Tanje here, and I'm back after a month since my last video. And before anything else, I wanted to sincerely apologize for this video is long overdue and some people were eagerly asking for it. But yeah, let's just hang out and check these wonderful builds from the Quicken Serenitea pot contest. Okay, so without further ado, welcome to part 2 of my Quicken Top 20 personal picks. And by this time, you probably know the winners, and I wanted to congratulate them again for sharing their amazing works with us. Alright, so we previously reviewed 10 builds on the part 1 of this series, and now we will be looking into the remaining 10 entries, and again, this is not arranged in any particular order. Okay, so let's start off with this unique and kind of a head-turner type of builds, and if you're actively browsing these Quicken entries on the past few months, you might have stumbled upon one of these builds. Okay, so let's just call this the out-of-the-box build recognition. And the nominees are the Tabibito Surprise by Sanju Tabirama from Asia's server, the Valhalla by Akira from Asia's server, Tetra Cabbage by Nasmus from Asia's server, and the Right Hand of God by Yuyan Hana from Asia's server. And the winner for the out-of-the-box build recognition award goes to Tetra Cabbage by Nasmus. Okay, so I read that many people are saying that Trojan Horse should definitely win this contest, so maybe let's address this one quickly. Okay, so the other 3 builds have something in common, and they indeed look exceptional, and no doubt the building techniques are well executed. But then they all missed one of the most important criteria for this contest, which is to highlight the set that they used. Okay, so let me quote this from the criteria for judging, and it is said that you may use item styles from different regions, but it should not take away the spotlight of the main theme, which is Quicken. So in this picture, what do you think is the main spotlight of the build? Right, the Trojan Horse. Okay, from this photo, what do you think is the main spotlight? Right again, the big hand. And lastly, with this one, it's obviously the rocket, right? And even though one of the building that was used to build it is included in the set, we fail to see the blending of Sumeru and Inazuma at first glance. And again, the main focus of the overall build should be aligned with the theme Quicken. And I would not dive in deeper with the lore, because this one has, believe it or not, 10-page long story, and hands down for the effort you put in this, and believe me, I really tried to read all of it. And I'm saying this again for the last time, that we should focus on criterias with higher percentage, because that's what makes your entry viable to reach higher amongst others. So yeah. Okay, let's proceed with Nasmus' entry and discuss more about the Tetra Cabbage. Okay, so let's go first with the lore. And the lore is very brief, right? And it's about the Yashiro Commission hiring Kaveh to build the Tetra Cabbage to honor the almighty shogun. And I just wish you expound this one a bit, like this has to commemorate something, right? Or state something how the Yashiro Commission ended up choosing Kaveh from Sumeru out of all the other nations. And we need that tea, okay? So spill more tea next time to give more dynamic to the story, okay? Alright, so moving on to the build. This is one of the entries I remembered, not only for the name, which I'm not sure if I should be taking seriously, like, come on guys, if I happen to be in the Shogunate army, I would be pretty much dead by now.
The Raiden Shogun summons you to the Tetra Cabbage.
I'll have to ask my accountant about that.
Gone to oblivion!
As I was saying, not only the title made an impact, but also about how Nasman managed to create this with a Sumeru main mansion. And having those furnishings with the big load consumption like the mansion pagodas, the sakura tree with those cat statues, and the hot spring, which amazes me because I've built something like this with a Sumeru mansion and I didn't dare to put this kind of details, knowing it adds a huge chunk of load on my build. So let's watch the walkthrough. Before climbing on the ramp, we got this sand boulder and I appreciate the effort of sinking it to give a sense of entry or like a transition from grass going to the wood platform of the build. And from there, you got a detail like this small shrine and you have this area going to the crafting table. I just wish you put a proper step to access that area by not just jumping over from the platform to platform. Yeah, and going up, you have this watchtower and a path going to a house. And I'm not sure about that side part that you showed. Maybe the house didn't fit over the pagoda's platform, right? And you tried to conceal it with those suspended wood platforms. Yeah, and okay, so anyway, moving on, here you got the hot spring, which is pretty nice. And again, you're still able to put that animated ship furnishing, and again, very nice. And as you enter this area, you got this phantasmal gate going to that sakura tree. I really can't with this person, but I mean, these are the kind of furnishings that we tried so hard to avoid just to conserve load, right? And it's amazing that everything fits with this build, also considering the fact that Nasman were able to balance the Inazuma and Sumeru theme on his work. Great job and thank you for this entry. This next build is called Hanging Gardens of Icanome by Iris Dailies. Okay, so for the lore, I like how you tell the story and the origin of this place because it stirs up the reader's curiosity about this historical place, and we might be the lucky few who gets to witness this garden. So let's move on to the build, shall we? Alright, I love how you presented the buildings and other furnishings you used per area. This one might be included in the simple build category, yeah, but also one of the prettiest. I really like the combination of those Inazuman corridors and the desert buildings because they fit in surprisingly well. I also love the simple details like this picnic setup with those pillows. It's the large stone mill, right? And these planters made from a sword rack. Very creative. And another important thing is that the main set that was used is still the main focus if you look at the overall build. No other buildings overpowers the main set, which is good. But one thing I want to suggest with regards to the vegetation is that the use of palm trees might be more fitting when you make this Hanging Gardens theme, and it kind of balances the overall build because it sort of leans more with Inazuma. Yeah, and I also hope there were more flowers and bushes near the picnic set area because I really like that part. And lastly, stone paths or pavements on front doors might add a bit of a value or somehow add a bit of a detail from these plain green surfaces. But that's just it. Good job, Iris, and thank you for this entry. This build is called Arataki Base, the Mightiest Oni Kabuto by Quicken Serenitea. Okay, so the lore is pretty simple and straightforward. This is supposed to be the Arataki base, and it is said that this once were constructed by the help of the Traveler and some famous Sumeru architects. Okay, so since the gang already existed way before Ito met the Traveler, this one implies that of course they already have a previous base, and this one's the, let's say, improved and renovated one. And my only comment regarding this is that the last line almost felt like a last-minute thought to include a bit of Sumeru influence in it. Or should it be like the Traveler is the one who introduced this famous architect to the gang? Because it kinda sounds like a separate scenario. But yeah, you can clarify it in the chat if you're here. Moving on to the build, my first impression is wow. The front part or the entryway already leaves a huge impression of the build. You can see how Misko combined these buildings and other furnishings to be able to create this new detailed facade, and it's amazing. I personally think that one characteristic of a good design is to keep the viewer's interest by keeping their eye movement all over your work, like this one, right? A lot of details have been placed and it makes you want to explore and look which furnishings were used, like those hanging in zoom-in lamps, those floated plant boxes, using a canopy with same straw roofing that blends in really well, and so on. Again, the use of furnishing and accessories is really important on composing a build like this for you to be able to blend everything so it doesn't look random like a salad bowl. Yeah, and moving on, I also love the use of these boulders as a natural looking stone walls, and also the details on every houses are great. And this water feature with a cat statue that looks like it's climbing its way up is so cute, and you can wash your feet as well. But the only thing I felt like missing is a small outer arena for the Onychabatos, though you can say that they train the beetles inside, but knowing these guys, they also love doing activities outdoors, yeah? But all in all, I really love the build, and the amount of effort on putting details in each areas is outstanding. Thank you very much for this entry. Okay, so this next entry is called Cultural Harmony on Island Paradise by Pat in Asia server. Okay, you can pause the video here if you want to take the time to read the lore, but to give you a summary of it, it's all about this little village created by the Sumerian and Inazuman people that despite their differences in culture and their way of living, they embraced each other's culture and learned from it. As what the lore wanted to tell us, that this certain village best represents the unity and beauty of diversity, and I really like how this was delivered. It was very heartwarming and inspiring at the same time. Good job. Okay, so let's dive into the build. Starting with this beautiful shared courtyard, we have these winding wooden paths and a lovely landscape mostly composed of floras. I love how the houses looks very different but still blends in really well, and that hurts my brain to think how did that work? But upon looking closely at it, it is actually the suspended wooden walkways that blends these two all together. You see, these wooden paths are like the extension of these straw-roofed Sumeru houses, which also became the part of the landscape. So to put it in simple terms, the straw-roofed houses also serves or became part of the landscape. And if you still don't get it, let's try another analogy here to make everything clear. Okay, so this Sumeru house plus this Inazuman house is no way gonna blend in together. Imagine it as a sandwich, okay? So there's no way that two breads could make a perfect sandwich. You have to put something in between to tie them together, right? Now, that's when the landscaping should come in, which serves as our sandwich filling. But it doesn't end there, because like a sandwich, it can collapse or be scattered and become messy when nothing holds it together. And this is when the sandwich toothpick became useful, which is equivalent to our wooden walkways, which connects these two houses and hold everything together. Now that maybe made you hungry, but it's the first thing that came up to my mind. Okay, so moving on. Of course, how could we not appreciate how cozy this makeshift house interiors look like? I love how you used these hot spring walls to patch those transparent surfaces and make a decent interior space. It may not be the cleanest since you can't really patch everything up, like the holes on those doors and those grids on the windows, which could affect the exterior, but hey, it still worked and turned out really good. And the last thing I wanted to comment is, you could have utilized the mentioned pagoda a bit more, like using its platforms or something other than sinking it, because it kinda dragged it out of the spotlight. Yeah, and again, we still wanted to see both of the furnishing sets to be the highlight of the build. But yeah, that's just it. And overall, I really like the composition of this and how balanced the build was. And thank you very much for this entry. Okay, so this next entry is called Inameru Resort of Bliss by Lolit from Asia server. Alright, so the lore is a bit too simple and it kinda just describes the amenities of the resort, and it would be best if you put a bit of a background story or a brief history about the resort, okay? Okay, so when it comes to the build, I really like how cleanly you built this one, especially the main structure in the middle, and the combination of that Inazuma building and the Samara Tower is almost seamless, and they really go well with each other. Their pool looks really nice, but I hope that the main structure in the middle is also aligned to it, right? So when you enter the place, you have like this one focal point. I also like how you converted these Inazuman watchtowers to be the resort cottages, and great job as well with the marketplace because it really looks lively with all that colorful carpets. And one last comment is it would be a bit nice if you added more vegetations upon entry on that stair part, because if you ask me, I kinda need something pretty to look at while I'm climbing those many steps that you made. But overall, I love the simplicity of this and how clean the combination of the buildings were, and it's pretty balanced too. So yeah, great job Lolit, and thank you for this submission. Okay, so our next build is called the Forgotten Sanctuary by Wami or Pavina. Okay, so this one is like a sanctuary or a temple, maybe for foxes, because I just referenced it with that fox statue on the fountain. Okay, so it is said there that this place used to be home for certain animals and mysteriously disappeared over time. So the lore doesn't tell much about the details of it, and it kinda invokes mystery to the place, which is good since it goes well with this place. So yeah, let's go ahead and proceed with the build. So this whole place is actually elevated, which makes it easier if you wanted to sink something on the build's ground level. And admit it or not, sinking things on the real ground requires more effort than regular floating, right? Okay, so you've noticed that there are a lot of sunken furnishings, which is great because sinking furnishings makes anything transform into something new and different to its usual look, and that makes your build unique and creative. I love the tiny details like those vases and books on the wall, and also you might think, what partition is this? Turns out it's just the back of the 5-kase nishiki, and again making use of the furnishing without making it look like the usual. Moving on with the buildings, stacking these Sumeru houses creates a new look of those buildings, which looks good, and the combination of the main sets looks great as well. Having ancillary spaces from those Inazuman corridors creates more area of interest other than the theater stage. And lastly, of course, the dedication of putting these vines all over the build is just great, and I love how everything were placed carefully to hide those unnecessary grapevine supports. And overall, the theme was well executed, and the balance is pretty good. Thank you so much for this entry. Moving on to the next entry, and this one is called Blooming Temple by Nakusakura from EU server. Okay, you could just pause here if you wanted to read the lore, but to sum it up, some parts are okay, but most of it kind of just discuss or justify how Sumeru and Inazuman architecture could go well together, right? And I kind of expect more of the story behind the build, or perhaps an interesting story with regards to the combination of these two distinct styles. The composition is good, and it's just that it sounds more of an essay than lore. Alright, so moving on to the build, I really love how the buildings are placed and arranged, especially the mid part and the highest part of the build, and just like the title, it really looks like a blooming lotus flower. And the combination of Sumeru and Inazuman buildings are really good, and the symmetry is just perfect. Some people might disagree with me, but there's really something very pleasing to see a perfectly symmetrical structure. Well, we could take these wonders of the worlds as examples, and you can never go wrong with these good old techniques. Alright, so moving on, I like how you created an enclosed space using different bushes, and it helps frame the whole structure, and it creates a sense of enclosement or like an entrance to the place. Details like the fountain and landscaping around it is really nice, and also that makeshift interior you made is also a nice touch to the build. Sorry, I'm not so sure which part was it. I think it's the pavilion part in the middle, right? Okay, so maybe it would be nicer if you were able to create like a window to view the outdoors as well. And one thing that I felt missing is like the base of the overall structure, and it looks really nice from afar, right? But it would look grander if it's a bit elevated, like a podium as the foundation. But again, that could take a bunch of load, so maybe sacrificing certain furnishings might be necessary. But yeah, overall, Nakusakura did a great job composing this build, and thank you so much for this entry. Our next entry is called Suzumas Boat by Kaori from NA server. Okay, so it is said that this boat serves as the wanderer's place of refuge, where he feels at ease and calm. I like the composition of the lore. It's brief and simple, but it gives you the overall idea or history of the place. And the last part really sounds like the wanderer would say. Great job! Okay, so moving on to the build, it looks good with all these houses sitting on different levels, and it also gives this abandoned place vibes with those overgrown plants. I'm just having a hard time to see this as a boat because it kinda looked more like a huge raft, right? Maybe if we're making something like a floating structure over the water, we should also consider that the overall design looks like it could actually float on the water. Which means the materials that is used should be lighter, like wood. So from those considerations, I would suggest avoiding using stones or furnishings that obviously looks heavy, like those steps. Instead, use something that looks lighter. It's a shame that we don't have the wood stairs during the contest period, because that would have looked even better with it. Overall, the build is good. The small gardens and details on the front of the houses are really nice, and the combination of Inazuman and Sumeru furnishings are pretty balanced, and I'm impressed that you created this detailed build and sunk everything below. Great job, and thank you so much for this entry. Okay, our next entry is called Blissful Retreat at Shanty's Resort and Spa. Alright, so the lore states that this resort offers the perfect relaxation for the visitors. I love how you put a story behind this huge ancient flower tree and how it benefits the people who visits the place. It helps us get into the experience of what it's like to be on that resort spa. I really like how you integrate the existing pond of the area to the whole build, which looks really good on that angle. Everything looks cohesive, and I like the idea that it kinda spreads out throughout the area by adding vegetations around it. Also, good effort for syncing the structures to create the beautiful wooden platforms. Also, the boulders on the hot spring areas are sunken, which creates this clean, flat surface and looks pleasing because this type of areas does not really need wild grass or something, right? Okay, so moving on to the second deck, which is really nice, having a great view of the amenities below. This is like a restaurant or a cafe. I like how you use these huge tents as a roof because it adds beauty to the overall build and it helps blend the structure to that huge flower. You also have here a good view of the neighboring islands, which is really nice, and the rest are just great details and accessories that you can interact with, which is one of a good aspect in the build. The only thing I wanna say with regards to the balance is you should have used a bit more Inazuman furnishings or buildings, since having this huge Sumeru tree has a huge chance that it will dominate the whole build, especially that this one was built in Sumeru realm as well. This choice of realm could be a bit risky if you consider balancing a certain theme, because this build screams Sumeru and it's pretty hard for it to be considered neutral, unlike Emerald Peak and Cool Isle, right? But yeah, that's just it. Overall, the build is really nice, and the effort of putting everything together using floating and sinking method really pays off. Thank you very much for this entry. Alright, moving on to the next and the last entry. This one is called Rest House of Rivalry by Paradisea from Asia's server. Okay, so the story is about a scholar who came originally, I think, from Inazuma, and she created or dedicated this house for her late lover. Okay, so this realm is like an invention of her while she was studying in the academia. I really find this story interesting because it's a good mix of sadness and sweetness at the same time, right? And it gives a lot of value to the whole build. Moving on to the build, I really remember this one. I think I said it looked like a cake on Tico's live, but don't get me wrong, because I meant it in a good way. You know those birthday cakes you get as a kid? I really love those. It's maybe because it was laid on a perfect rectangle base and it's pretty neat. Like what I was saying on the previous build, that it takes a bit of consideration on balancing this kind of build because you place it in a Sumeru realm, because the overall feel of the realm might dominate the whole build, but Paradisea did a great job on balancing the build by making these Inazuman houses to be the main highlight, and made Sumeru features its landscape and backdrop, which makes everything balanced. I love how you incorporate a Zen garden with this build, and it's amazing how it goes well with the rest of the Sumeru landscaping, like these mushrooms. And you can tell that the combination and placement of plants are carefully picked and placed, and that makes me think if you're sort of knowledgeable with landscape, because it really looks good. Oh, also the details on the end of the corridor with all these books adds a nice touch and area of interest to the design. Overall, I really like how everything was composed, all the clean details like those stairs, the shift on different levels, how you build this landscape around this beautiful fish pond, and the attention to details like providing breaks to the boulders so it doesn't look flat and plain. And that simple technique makes a big difference. Oh, and also that stone path really looks interesting and different when they're placed together like that. Very nice. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for your entry. And that's it for my top 20 picks. But before I end this video, I just want to show you these two lovely entries that I also find interesting, and I hope you like it too. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end of this video, and I hope to see you again on the next one. Bye everyone!